Listen, I have this wife. Her name is Robyn, and she would never let me do anything not.
Have you ever felt a room breathe against you, as though the very air had grown heavy with unspoken testimonies, and the clock upon the wall had learned to count not seconds, but secrets? That was the courthouse this morning, thick, stale, and watchful, when Meri Brown stepped inside without sunglasses, without jewelry, without even the faintest attempt to pretend she was fine. Clutching a battered manila folder so tightly it bowed in the middle, her black coat wrapped about her like resolve rather than warmth. And at her entry, Robyn stiffened on instinct, jaw tight, eyes hard, while Meri did not so much as glance her way, because today was not about old courtesies, but about whether breath and safety could coexist in the same house. The judge, a slight woman whose spectacles and tired mouth suggested she had heard more polished lies than clumsy truths, slid into place, scanned the emergency docket, and lifted her gaze. And when Meri stood voice even, spine straight, drama banished, she said simply, "She came to my home. I asked her to leave. She refused. She threatened me." Robyn snapped, "It's not true," but the judge raised a hand. "There will be time." And then the solicitor placed that bent folder upon the bench, and out came quiet things that make thunder screenshots. A clipped audio, a 2-minute sliver of home security footage with a timestamp as sharp as a blade, each piece stamped, tagged, verified. The moment rumor matured into record. 2 nights before, Meri had been alone in the warm hush of her sitting room, ring light blinking to life, while she filmed an unlisted diary just to prove to herself that her voice still reached the walls, that she hadn't been erased by years of being told to wait, to trust, to shrink. And as she spoke about letting go of a bed and breakfast and the rooms where she had hosted other people's certainty, there came a knock-knock, a doorbell's polite chirp, but a quick, insistent knock that knew exactly where to hit the heart hand. At the window, she saw Robyn, hoodie up, face bare, clutching a folder to her chest. Meri left the chain on and cracked the window. "What are you doing here?" Robyn's words tumbled. "5 minutes, please. It's about something I found about Kody, about everything. I can't go home with this." And Meri, who had learned that panic can wear the mask of confession, said now is not a good time. And Robyn's pleading hardened. "It has to be now. You're the only one who will believe me. Christine won't answer. Janelle has cut me off." Meri slipped her phone from her pocket and pressed record without looking. A small, saving decision. Robyn whispered of bank information in a storage shed, of money concealed, of fear if I speak he'll. "I don't know what he'll do." And Meri said, "Then go to the police." And Robyn said, "No, not them. We can fix this together. Make him tell the truth." And when Meri told her to leave, Robyn's eyes darkened. "So you're just like the rest. If this comes out the wrong way, it ruins him and it ruins you, so choose wisely." That was when the deadbolt slid home and Meri backed away, because she recognized a threat spoken in the grammar of care. In court, the audio played in the judge's steady silence. The clip showed tears curdling into calculation. And when asked whether any other witness had been there, Meri said no. "But I texted Christine," and the judge nodded. "I'll accept a statement. Do you deny being at her house, Miss Brown?" "No. I was there, but I was frightened. I was trying to protect her from what?" Robyn did not answer, and the folder was stamped Exhibit A, and the hearing that should have been brief found a hinge and opened into something larger. Meri's counsel asked for a court order on the shared storage unit, and the judge signed. And suddenly, this was not simply about who stood at whose door at 10:30 in the night, but about signatures and sums, and the arithmetic of advantage. Then Robyn asked to speak as a mother, and the judge allowed it, and Robyn's voice, tremoring yet threaded with steel, said, "He made me sign things I didn't understand. And if this comes out, he'll blame me for everything, but I wasn't the only one who knew." The room turned to Meri, who didn't return the look. For the first time that morning, she spoke without pause. "Then you won't mind if we open the second envelope?" Panned from her coat, she drew a thicker, sealed bundle, which the judge received with one arched brow and the quiet curiosity of a woman Who expects rot under fresh paint? Recess, the gavel cracked. In the corridor, noise gathered like weather. A black SUV slid to the curb and Kody Brown stepped out alone, no tie. No lawyer, only the face of a man who has finally met the inside of his own story. 48 hours earlier, the side yard camera at Meri's had gone black after Robyn walked, away from the window and towards the gate. Which is how fear sometimes announces itself. Not with shouts, but with a blank screen where vigilance used to be. By morning, every lock had been changed and her solicitor briefed, "This isn't wife drama anymore." This is dangerous. While across town, Robyn sat in a car park with that folder open like a wound. Wire transfers. Bank slips. A letter in Christine's hand. Signatures where they never belonged. Meri sent the video to her solicitor, then to herself. Then, after 17 minutes in, which Courage figured out how to breathe to Christine, who replied she's spiraling. What's in the folder, I don't know, but if she's turned up, that it's big. When court resumed, the judge called Robyn to the stand. And Robyn moved as if carrying bricks on her shoulders, stated her name, admitted the visit. Why did you go? Because I thought I could stop it from getting out of control. Stop what? The silence that followed weighed more than any answer. Then Meri said, "There is another submission, not paper. Your Honor, audio recorded legally in my home and when the room filled with Kody's voice, cold glass over gravel. If she doesn't stop asking about the books, I'll bury her in paperwork. Make her look like the fraud, and if she shows that folder to anyone, especially Christine, I'll burn this whole thing down." The intake of breath was not outrage so much as recognition. Because everyone has heard some version of that sentence. In a different house, under oath, Kody said yes. It was his voice, context, leadership, steam let off. The clerk logged the admission. Truth stood without decoration. And still in Meri's bag lay one last envelope, black, sealed. Printed, "Do not open unless he lies." So when Kody declared, "I've never forged anything," the judge nodded to Meri. The seal tore like fabric. And out slid a notarized lease, backdated. Months after Christine had left. Initials that were not hers. Witnessed by Robyn, owned by Kody. A paper leash for tax advantage. "That's fraud," Christine said, and Kody's mouth opened and nothing came. Because paper speaks a language even charisma cannot translate. The judge ordered investigators for the next session. In the corridor, microphones turned into weather. Somewhere, a text appeared on Robyn's phone. "You weren't supposed to bring that folder." And from then on, this ceased to be a domestic quarrel and became a forensic map trust, formed, discrepancies noticed, dependents misreported, lease backdated. Signature forged, personal spend laundered as Rhino-fanned when the state laid out the timeline with the blunt, merciless font of a projector. Kody tried the oldest miracle of all, turning we into she. "I didn't do it alone," he said, and Robyn, who has wept oceans to sway opinion, did not weep. She said, "I'll cooperate. I'll give you everything. I'll show you the software." I want immunity on the cuffs that closed upon Kody's wrists. Did not clink like punishment so much as punctuation, the full stop at the end of a long, badly written sentence. Meri did not gloat. Victory is not a shout. It is a breath, and when Leon's quiet letter added the last necessary thread emails about using a child's name as accounting clay. A trust form no child had seen, proof that control had masqueraded as faith. Everyone finally understood that the story called family had been, for too long, a business called silence, and that silence had been its most profitable product. The moment the forged lease slid into the courtroom light, the room seemed to tilt, as if every wall had been waiting for this paper to arrive. And Christine, with trembling hands, yet a voice that did not falter, named it for what it was and in that word lived not only her grief, but the unspoken ache of years in which she and the others had been told to be patient, to trust, to leave the numbers to Kody, when in truth the numbers had never been theirs at all. Meri remained still, the quiet architect of this exposure, her fingertips brushing the edge of her handbag, as if to remind herself that she had not conjured this from imagination, that she was not bitter or delusional, but that she was holding proof that silence had always been his favorite accomplice. Robyn, once paraded as the symbol of loyalty, crumpled into the bench as if her very spine confessed complicity. The familiar sobs which once earned her sympathy catching in her throat, drying into nothing because tears are powerless against evidence stamped and signed. Betrayal echoed around the oak walls like an unseen choir, for belief itself had been converted into currency and traded behind their backs. When the judge's gavel struck and summoned the state investigators, the saga shifted shape. No longer a melodrama for the cameras, but a forensic unraveling where paper cuts hurt more than sharp words. And outside, the press still clamored for heroes and villains. But inside, the truth unfolded line by line, date by date, signature by signature. Meri inhaled as Christine pressed her hand in the corridor, a silent pledge that they were not alone anymore. For sometimes solidarity is not found in speeches, but in the quiet weight of another's palm. Robyn, meanwhile, scrolled her phone. Until the message appeared, "You weren't supposed to bring that folder," and her stomach dropped like stone, for she recognized the shadow behind those words. And in that instant, realized the man she had shielded for so long would leave her, to burn if it meant saving himself. The following morning, the fraud unit arrived, brisk, unsentimental, their press suits and clipped tones announcing that they had no interest in family mythology or televised heartbreak. They cared only for numbers, and numbers never lie. Projector hummed to life, casting a sterile light on the wall. 2017, trust established. 2019, discrepancies. 2020, dependents misreported. 2021, leases backdated. 2022, Robyn's signature appearing where it should not. 2023, luxuries disguised as expenses. Silence deepened until it was almost unbearable, because there is nothing louder than the word fraud written plainly, for all to see. Kody rose, trying to drag authority back into his failing voice, insisting he had not acted alone, gesturing towards Robyn as though she bore the guilt. But Robyn did not cry this time. Instead, she straightened, her eyes no longer pleading, but cold with the clarity of survival. And she said she would cooperate, that she would hand over emails, passwords, software, anything if immunity was guaranteed. In that single moment, the fortress collapsed not from attack, but from within. For the wife who had once been his shield now became the witness who would testify against him. The detective nodded, the judge agreed. And the sound of the handcuffs clicking shut around Kody's wrists reverberated through the courtroom like punctuation. The definitive full stop at the end of a long, badly written story. He stiffened, as though he might resist, but his eyes betrayed him, darting between Robyn and Meri in desperate search of a mercy that no longer existed. Meri, however, did not gloat. She folded her hands like a woman in prayer, for her triumph was not about humiliation, but about being believed at last. Robyn sat rigid, her gaze forward, finally understanding that the loyalty she had wrapped around herself like armor had been the very chain he had fastened around her. And she saw too late that she had clung so fiercely to him only to be dragged down in the process. The investigators returned after recess with folders thicker, eyes sharper, and dropped further revelations. Emails from a business account thought long dead. Correspondence where Kody asked whether Leon's name could still be used for a filing, words that froze the air because they revealed not accident but deliberate strategy. Leon, absent yet present through their letter, had already spoken louder than any courtroom testimony. And the weight of a child unwillingly drafted into deception settled heavily upon every listener. The horror was plain identities themselves had been turned into collateral. Christine, steady with Janelle beside her, whispered that this had been the pattern all along. That every holiday cloaked as sacrifice was financed by forged promises. The screen changed again. Jewelry, flights, private security, tuitional marked as business expenditure. The gasp that rippled across the gallery was not born of shock anymore, but recognition, for they had all lived the consequences without ever seeing the receipts. Meri's throat tightened, not from fear but from vindication, because every time she had been told she did not understand business, she now saw with brutal clarity that she had understood all too well, and the only reason her voice had been silenced was because it pointed too directly at the truth. Robyn leaned forward then, hands trembling but her voice unyielding, insisting she had the logs, the transfers, the keys to every account. Her words trembled between confession and survival, a bargain struck by someone drowning and reaching for driftwood. Kody turned upon her with the fury of a man betrayed, but his rage found no target because the courtroom no longer revolved around him. Power had drained from him like sand through open fingers, and the judge reminded them all that emotion does not change evidence, anger does not erase ink, denial does not dissolve the truth. Meri exhaled slowly, shoulders lowering, because for the first time she could feel the weight shifting not towards control, not towards fear, but towards truth, finally allowed to stand in the open without disguise. And as the silence settled, heavier than the oak beams above them, it was as though the very architecture of the courtroom had absorbed every word, every number, every betrayal, and turned it back upon the man who had once strutted through his home proclaiming himself leader, protector, patriarch, but now, with iron circling his wrists and the word fraud painted across the walls by the merciless precision of investigators, Kody was revealed as something far smaller, a man dwarfed by the very lies he had authored. And Meri, watching him with steady eyes, thought not of revenge but of the countless nights she had sat alone wondering whether she was the problem, whether her doubts made her unworthy, and now realizing that she had been silenced not because she was wrong but because she had been dangerously right all along. Christine shifted in her seat, her face pale but resolute, as memories of years past pressed upon her, the times she sold her jewelry to make ends meet, the moments she tucked away unpaid bills because Kody had promised that investments would soon bear fruit, and now here on the projector were those very promises unmasked as indulgence. Robyn's furniture, Kody's flights, dinners, and trinkets paraded as business deductions. Janelle whispered something under her breath, a prayer, or perhaps a curse, while Robyn sat forward, her body rigid, her mouth dry, eyes fixed on the investigators as though tethered to the only lifeline she had left, offering passwords and emails like tokens in exchange for survival. The detective unmoved scribbled notes and clicked to the next slide, revealing charts of overlapping accounts, balances shuttled between names like shells in a rigged game. And the gallery murmured because what they were seeing was not only deception but orchestration, a labyrinth designed to keep everyone confused until the truth itself drowned. Meri inhaled sharply, for she remembered every moment she had been told to stop asking questions, every sharp glance that suggested she lacked the intelligence to grasp the complexity of his business. And now she could see that the only complexity had been the deliberate fog laid to keep her blind. The judge leaned back, her face betraying neither shock nor sympathy, only a slow, deliberate recognition that this case was no longer about family disputes, but about crimes etched in ink. And the words she spoke cut through the murmurs like steel. This is not mismanagement. This is manipulation. The weight of those words landed upon Robyn too, her hands trembling as she lowered her gaze, perhaps finally recognizing that her compliance had not saved her but had implicated her. That every tearful nod she had given, every signature she had scrawled, had been another stitch in the web that was now collapsing upon them all. The click of the handcuffs earlier had been a full stop, but now each new revelation was another exclamation mark, hammering into the record. And Christine closed her eyes briefly, exhaling as though at last the burden she had carried silently had begun to loosen. Meri's lips parted slightly, not in a smile but in a release, for vindication does not always shout. Sometimes it's sighs. The air in the courtroom after the judge's final words felt different, as though every molecule carried the residue of what had just been unearthed. And as Meri lowered her gaze from the bench, she understood that nothing in their lives would ever return to the quiet pretense it once carried, because pretense had been shattered, ripped apart by receipts, signatures, and confessions. And Christine leaned back in her chair with eyes closed, a fragile smile ghosting across her lips, not from joy but from relief that the weight of her suspicions no longer belonged to her alone. While Janelle sat forward, fingers clasped tightly together, absorbing the enormity of what had been confirmed. And Robyn, once the fortress's fiercest defender, seemed to shrink into herself. Shoulders hunched as though each page of evidence pinned her further into the reality she had avoided. Kody, flanked now by officers, stared at the floor, jaw rigid, his usual arsenal of smirks. Proclamations and grandiose explanations extinguished. Because charisma cannot outtalk numbers and bravado cannot erase ink. And Meri, still steady, thought of how many times she had begged herself to stay silent for the sake of peace. How often she had twisted her own instincts into knots to convince herself that faith was stronger than fear. But now in this sterile chamber, she understood that faith had been the costliest currency she had ever offered. Poured endlessly into a man who built a kingdom from their sacrifices only to disguise it as leadership. The judge adjourned, and the gallery emptied in murmurs and flashes of cameras. But Meri lingered a moment longer, pressing her hand against the wooden rail before standing. For she knew that stepping out now meant stepping into a future unrecognizable, one without the illusions that had held them captive. Outside, the sky was a pale gray canvas, reporters swarming with microphones raised like weapons of curiosity. Their questions flying. Will charges be pressed? Will the show continue? Who betrayed whom? But Meri walked through them with quiet resolve, offering no comment, because some truths need no narration. They breathe on their own. Christine joined her at the curb, slipping her hand into Meri's for the first time in years. And the simple act said more than hours of dialogue could, while Janelle followed close, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and even Robyn, lagging behind, did not defend herself but walked silently. Perhaps recognizing that silence for once could not be twisted into strength. Kody emerged last, hands cuffed, shoulders slumped. The flashbulbs exploded around him, catching the face of a man finally stripped of his illusions, a patriarch no longer, just a defendant. And as the vehicles pulled away and the courthouse doors groaned shut, the story that had masqueraded as entertainment for so long revealed itself for what it truly was, not about polygamy or property or power, but about silence and what it costs when finally shattered on as the convoy of vehicles pulled away from the courthouse. The sound of tires grinding against gravel seemed to echo louder than the gavel itself, because what had been sealed inside four walls was now spilling into the world beyond. A storm of headlines, whispers, and reckonings that could no longer be contained. And Meri, standing by the curb with Christine and Janelle flanking her, inhaled the cold Flagstaff air as though tasting freedom for the very first time, her chest rising not with triumph but with relief. Because survival is not always marked by celebration but by the steady act of still being able to breathe. Christine's fingers tightened around hers, a reminder that broken bonds could still create unexpected solidarities. While Janelle's eyes brimmed with an emotion too vast to define, part sorrow for years wasted, part vindication for truths finally spoken, and Robyn, a few steps behind, lowered her head into her hands as the cameras flared, knowing that the silence she had once weaponized had finally turned against her, leaving her stranded between complicity and confession inside the lead vehicle. Kody sat handcuffed, his reflection staring back at him from the tinted glass. And for once, he had no words to hurl, no script to perform, no audience to dazzle. because the audience he had always counted on was gone, replaced by investigators who did not care for charm. And as the city blurred past, he felt the chilling weight of a future where the narrative was no longer his to control. Meri, meanwhile, stepped slowly down the courthouse steps, pausing only once to look back at the heavy wooden doors. Not with longing, but with closure, for those doors had witnessed her silence, her fear, and finally her voice, and now they closed. Behind her, like the binding of a book she would never reopen. The reporters surged, microphones stabbing forward, questions clashing in the air. Yet Meri simply shook her head, a soft smile breaking the steel of her face because she knew that answers were already written in the evidence. The recordings, the signatures, she had no need to explain herself further. Christine whispered that freedom was strange when it finally arrived. And Janelle nodded, whispering that it was also heavy, because with freedom came the truth of how long they had endured without it. The crowd dispersed slowly, but the story did not. Across the nation, headlines screamed of fraud, betrayal, restraining orders, forged documents, and reality television's most infamous patriarch in handcuffs. Social media pulsed with hashtags demanding justice, threads dissecting every revelation, videos replaying the leaked audio where Kody's voice had threatened to bury Meri in paperwork, and millions of strangers who had once consumed their family, as entertainment now consumed their collapse as vindication. But beneath the noise for the women who had lived it, the truth was quieter, heavier, more intimate. They had survived years of gaslighting, manipulation, and financial deceit, and now at last the silence had broken. And as night fell over Flagstaff, the courthouse loomed in silence like a monument to everything that had collapsed within it, its windows still glowing faintly as clerks worked late to process forms that would shape the fate of an entire family once paraded as unity. And Meri, sitting quietly by her kitchen table hours later, let her hands rest upon the wood worn smooth by years of meals, conversations, and lonely cups of tea, reflecting on how that same table had once borne the weight of her doubts. The papers she dared not question, the nights she wondered if she was invisible. And now it carried this strange weight of release, for she had spoken and been heard. And the world had finally witnessed the truth she had carried like a stone in her chest. Christine, at her own home, exhaled long and deep, her children hovering close, asking questions with wide eyes, and she told them that justice does not erase pain, but it does clear the fog. It allows you to see the path forward, and she felt lighter, though still fragile, as if years of being diminished had pressed into her bones, and only now were they beginning to straighten. Janelle spent the night awake, pacing, her phone buzzing endlessly with messages of support, news outlets begging for comment, and yet she chose silence. For she knew her voice had already been woven into the record, stamped and sealed by the court. She looked at the photographs of her children on the mantelpiece and whispered to them, even though they were not in the room, promising that the years of sacrifice would not be wasted, that she would rebuild not just a home, but a legacy of truth. Robyn, by contrast, sat in her darkened living room, blinds drawn, her reflection fractured in the glass of the television screen that replayed her tear-streaked face as the news anchors spoke of her cooperation with investigators. And she realized that the loyalty she had clung to had transformed into survival, that her years of obedience had bought her nothing but suspicion. And she rocked back and forth slowly, whispering to herself that she had only done what she thought was required to keep the family together. Though deep down she knew that keeping the family together had never been the goal, only keeping him above them all. And Kody, in the silence of a holding cell, stared at the cinder block wall with a fury that had no outlet, his mind replaying every moment he had been celebrated, every time cameras had followed him, every time he had declared himself leader, only now to find himself leader of nothing. A man whose kingdom had been reduced to folders, exhibits, and the clink of chains. And even as he told himself he would rise again, that he would explain it all away, a part of him knew that narratives are fragile things, and once the world has seen through them, no performance can restore their power. And when the sun rose the following morning, it did not rise upon the same family it had once shone upon. For the empire that had been built on trust and silence now lay in fragments, scattered across court filings, leaked recordings, and broken illusions. And Meri, walking out into the pale light, felt the warmth upon her face, as though it belonged to her alone for the first time in decades. No longer shared under the shadow of a man who had taken more than he had ever given. Christine stood beside her, chin lifted, eyes wet, yet gleaming. For she knew that survival had blossomed into something greater. Freedom. And Janelle, steady and resolute, whispered that the future was theirs to write now. Not his, never his. Again, and Robyn lingered in the distance, shoulders bowed. The silence she once wielded now crumbling around her, leaving her with only the reckoning of choices made and loyalties misplaced. Inside a cold cell, Kody sat alone, the echo of his own voice from countless seasons of television haunting him. And for once, there were no cameras to edit, no audience to charm, no wives to silence. Only the reality that truth had arrived, uninvited and unstoppable. The courthouse doors groaned shut behind them one final time. And Meri did not look back, because this chapter was not worth another glance. She stepped forward with Christine and Janelle at her side, 3 women who had been cast for years as supporting characters but who now carried the story in their own voices. Unbroken, unfiltered, undeniable. Reporters shouted questions, flashbulbs sparked like lightning. But Meri smiled faintly and kept walking, because not every ending requires an explanation. Sometimes the ending is simply the act of leaving. And so it ended, not with a scream, not with a spectacle, but with footsteps upon stone, steady, unhurried, unstoppable, carrying them away from a past that had stolen too much and into a future where silence would never again be mistaken for peace.